Hey everyone, welcome back. Tonight we're going back to the Middle Ages, to a world filled with quiet fears, strange beliefs, and small, beautiful superstitions. So, make sure you're comfortable, maybe dim the lights, and if you enjoy drifting into history with me, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. It really helps the channel grow. Now let's begin. The things they feared, everyday superstitions of the Middle Ages. Imagine this. It's morning in a medieval village, the kind built from equal parts hope and mud. A gentle fog curls between the cottages, wrapping itself around thatched roofs as if even the air prefers to mind its own business. You wake to the soft crackle of a hearth and the smell of bread, yeasty, smoky, and slightly burnt, as always. Somewhere outside, a rooster announces himself late, as though he's already embarrassed about it. The year, though unimportant to you, is one of those comfortably medieval ones. Nothing much has changed in a century except whose name is shouted at church on Sundays. You stretch, you yawn, and, as custom demands, you quietly knock 3 times on the wooden bed frame before your feet touch the floor. Not for luck exactly, more for insurance. Because in this village, like most others, the invisible world is always half a breath away. You do not test it. You respect it. The first sound outside is the mill wheel, turning slow and lazy, powered by the same river that steals children's shoes. Its rhythm sets the tone for the day. The village smells of damp earth, wood smoke, and ambition on pause. Down the slope, near the bridge, stands the bakery. A sign hangs above it, just a piece of wood carved with a loaf that looks more like a potato. Inside, Tom the miller argues with Agnes, who has the village's most finely tuned sense of doom. Agnes. That bread's fallen flat again. Someone's cursed your flour, Tom. Tom. It's the weather. Agnes. Weather doesn't curdle yeast. Witches do. Tom. And how, Agnes? Would a witch even reach my flour? Agnes. Same way she reached my neighbor's goose last week. Through envy. She folds her arms, convinced she has just explained everything there is to know about economics, theology, and poultry. Tom sighs. He's long stopped arguing. Instead, he mutters his quiet countercharm, a phrase so ancient and nonsensical it may as well be a recipe for stew. By St. Dunstan's nose and St. Cuthbert's toes, let my dough rise true. It doesn't help, of course, but it feels respectful. And in the Middle Ages, respect is a form of survival. From the church on the hill, the bell rings, calling the village to its usual blend of faith and gossip. The sound travels over fields and roofs, echoing off the castle walls at the edge of sight. Inside the chapel, Father Bryn begins his morning prayers with the weary authority of a man who has given the same sermon 700 times. He's kind, deeply learned, and utterly defeated by the human imagination. He preaches against fear, against charms, curses, whispered spells, while half the congregation quietly touches the wood of the pews for protection. He pretends not to notice. When he finishes, Agnes approaches him, face grave. "Father," she whispers, "the baker's smoke smells different today. Should I sprinkle salt around my door? Or is that too hasty?" Father Bryn blinks. He spent decades wrestling with the devil in scripture, and yet, somehow, Agnes's salt supply has caused him more theological distress. "Perhaps," he says gently, "you might try praying." "Of course, Father. I'll pray while I sprinkle the salt." And with that, she departs, leaving him to wonder if perhaps superstition is not unbelief, but merely overenthusiastic faith management. Outside, a dog barks at absolutely nothing, as is traditional. Children chase each other with sticks and ideas. A breeze carries the scent of stew, firewood, and faint unease. Every window bears its own private charm. A sprig of herbs, a small iron key, or, at the baker's house, a horseshoe turned the wrong way, much to Agnes's horror. "The luck's pouring out, Tom," she insists. "Good," he says. "It'll make room for air." And so the day unfolds, slow, circular, safe in its routines. Behind every gesture lies a soft layer of logic woven from fear and comfort. They knock on wood, cross themselves, spit over shoulders, hang charms, whisper prayers. No one remembers exactly why, but everyone knows it's better not to stop. As the sun dips and the fog returns, the village grows quieter. You hear distant bells from the castle chapel, more refined, less honest than Father Bryn's clanging one. Somewhere near the walls, a knight adjusts his armor and tucks a small charm into his glove. He would never admit it aloud, but even courage prefers company. And as you drift back indoors, the fire sighs, the bread cools, and you think to yourself, it's not that people in the Middle Ages were foolish. They were simply thorough. They feared the unseen not because it was dark, but because it was everywhere. And somehow it still is. If you lived in this village long enough, you'd notice something curious. Whenever anything important was said, anything hopeful or risky, or even slightly optimistic, someone somewhere would tap on a piece of wood. A table, a beam, the door frame, a spoon handle. Knock, knock, knock. And if no wood was nearby, they'd simply mutter, touch iron then. It's sturdier anyway. They never explained why. They just did it. It's the medieval version of a reflex, like blinking, but for luck. According to Father Bryn, it began as a Christian gesture, knocking to call on the saints or the cross. According to Els with the herbalist, it was older, a forest thing, she'd say, in that tone implying she personally knew the trees involved. No one really knew which was true, but that didn't matter, because in this place explanations are optional. Traditions are self-sufficient. The tavern, with its drafty beams and eternal smell of ale, is the beating heart of superstition. Every story here is half truth, half yeast. Tonight, Tom the miller leans over his mug and whispers, "A man once failed to knock after boasting his bread rose perfectly next morning. He woke to find a weevil smiling at him." Across the table, Agnes gasps, "Smiling? With malice?" Tom confirms gravely. Agnes crosses herself 3 times and knocks so hard on the bench that dust falls from the rafters. Sir Roland, the young knight from the castle, sits nearby, pretending to be above such things. He laughs politely, the kind of laugh that says, "I am far too educated for this nonsense." And yet, later that night, as he adjusts his sword belt, he knocks lightly on the wooden post of his bed, just in case. The truth, of course, is that wood was sacred long before saints and scribes gave it names. In ancient groves, people whispered their fears into trees, believing spirits dwelled within them. By the Middle Ages, this old belief had simply changed costumes. Now, the villagers would knock not to wake the spirits, but to remind them to stay quiet. A polite little "please don't ruin this" to the universe. There's something endearingly humble about that. Even the bravest knight or most rational priest won't tempt fate outright. They'll make their plans, deliver their speeches, confess their faith, and then, almost casually, their fingers brush the table. A conversation between flesh and wood, man and mystery, pride and precaution. Father Bryn once tried to correct it. He declared from the pulpit that faith in wood was misplaced, that only prayer could ward off misfortune. The next morning, his sermon notes went missing. He found them, hours later, wedged under the altar, precisely 3 knocks distance from where he'd been standing. He did not bring it up again. That Sunday, after Mass, he was seen discreetly tapping the door as he left. Meanwhile, in the marketplace, Ellsworth sells blessed charms of oak and ash, each tied with twine and a promise. Oak for strength, ash for calm, yew for wisdom, she explains, though in truth the difference is mostly in marketing. She sells them for a few coins each, smiling as buyers clutch them with reverence. Then, when the last customer leaves, she taps the wood of her own table and whispers, "Thank you, my silent business partner." It's an odd kind of comfort, this superstition, somewhere between religion and rhythm. The gesture asks for nothing, demands no sacrifice, only a soft knock to keep chaos polite. Even now, centuries later, you probably still do it. You make a hopeful statement, then glance around for wood. Maybe a desk, a wall, a steering wheel. You tap twice, quietly, as if to apologize for being optimistic. And for a moment, you're not so different from Agnes or Tom or Sir Roland. You're just one more human trying to keep life from getting ideas. That night, the village falls silent under a pale moon. The sound of gentle knocking fades, replaced by the creak of beams and the whisper of wind through reeds. Father Bryn, half asleep, dreams that the church bell is hollow, that every echo is 1,000 small knocks from the past. He wakes, listens, and smiles faintly, because deep down even the priest knows, whether you call it faith, fear, or habit, sometimes the wisest thing you can do is knock first and ask questions later. If you walk a little way past the mill, beyond the meadow where sheep look permanently unimpressed, you'll find it, the crossroads, for dirt paths meet, shaped like an uneven cross drawn by a distracted saint. It's not much to look at, just dust, weeds, and a weathered signpost that points confidently in all directions. And yet, if you ask anyone in the village, they'll tell you, this is not a place to linger. You may pass through, you may hurry across, but you do not stop at a crossroads. In the Middle Ages, crossroads were feared, not for what you could see, but for what might be waiting. They were the ancient world's version of a bad Wi-Fi zone. The signal between heaven and hell got patchy here. It was said that spirits wandered at these intersections. The lost, the restless, the impolite dead. Burials sometimes happened here too, but only for the unholy. Suicides, criminals, or the occasional gossip whose words traveled too far. The logic was simple. Bury them where the roads cross, so their souls never find the way home again. An eternal timeout. Of course, Agnes the gossip claims to have seen something once. She tells anyone who'll listen, which is everyone, about a shadow figure she glimpsed one misty evening. It waved at me, she insists. Maybe it was a traveler? Suggests Tom. It waved with both hands, she replies darkly, and had no face. Tom nods, mostly because arguing with Agnes has been known to cause spiritual fatigue. Still, even he admits that the crossroads have an odd weight to them. Wind always blows there, even on still days. Animals avoid it, and Father Bryn's candle, when carried past the signpost, always sputters like it's gossiping. The church naturally has opinions. Father Bryn insists the only spirits at the crossroads are metaphors for temptation. He's quite proud of that phrasing, though it's wasted on his audience. Meanwhile, Els with the herbalist sells small cloth pouches filled with salt and crushed rosemary, for protection from what lingers between paths. She doesn't specify what lingers. It's better for business that way. By midsummer, the superstition has reached a comfortable level of chaos. Villagers begin avoiding the crossroads entirely, forcing the baker to walk an extra half-mile just to deliver a loaf. When Sir Roland rides past on his horse, he does so very uprightly, muttering prayers and pretending he's not doing it. The horse, far less interested in theology, simply snorts and takes the long route home. And then, one day, something happens that confirms everyone's suspicions forever. A traveler arrives, pale, muddy, and slightly lost, asking for directions. He claims to have been waiting a while at the crossroads. No one asks how long a while is. They just collectively decide to burn sage for a week. The next morning, Father Bryn organizes a small ceremony to remove the fear. He stands at the crossroads, cassock flapping in the wind, holding a cross, a candle, and his dignity, all three wavering. There is nothing to fear here, he proclaims loudly. No demons, no ghosts, no curses. Thunk, the signpost creaks and falls. It's just the wind, of course. But the congregation scatters like breadcrumbs in a storm. By evening, even Father Bryn quietly places a sprig of rosemary at the corner of his chapel door. From that day on, the crossroads becomes a place for small offerings. A coin left under a stone, a bit of bread, a whispered apology to whoever might be listening. Children dare each other to run across it after dark. Lovers meet there in secret, pretending their racing hearts are from fear of spirits. And travelers, even those who laugh at superstition, find their pace quickening when the road divides. Centuries later, we still have crossroads, real or otherwise. Decisions that feel heavier than they should. Moments where paths cross, where fate and choice stare each other down. And even now, part of you feels it, that ancient hesitation, that whisper of something watching. So you walk faster. You hum a little tune. You do what every villager once did. You pass through. You don't look back. And if the wind sighs behind you, you pretend it's just the trees gossiping. It begins, as many medieval stories do, with something small and furry being blamed for absolutely everything. In this case, a cat. A black one, to be precise, which is not ideal, since the Middle Ages considered that the feline equivalent of walking under a dozen ladders while shouting "curse me" into a mirror. Cats were both loved and loathed. On one hand, they ate mice, and mice were the sworn enemies of everything from bread to books. On the other hand, cats had attitude, and that was suspicious. They came when they wanted, stared when they shouldn't, and, worst of all, seemed to know things. In the small village by the castle, one particular cat has become the center of attention. Her name, bestowed by Agnes the gossip, is Shadow. No one's quite sure if Shadow belongs to anyone, but she's always there, perched on fences, watching silently, as though she's the village accountant of sin. And lately, strange things have been happening. Tom the miller's grain went moldy overnight. Elswitha's herbs dried too fast. And Father Bryn's candle refused to light 3 mornings in a row. Naturally, these unrelated events could only mean one thing. The cat is possessed. The villagers gather in the square to discuss the situation. It's a small crowd, mostly those with time, opinions, and pitchforks. Agnes. It stares straight through you. That's no normal animal. Tom. It's a cat, Agnes. Agnes. Exactly. Sir Roland. Nonsense. I've had cats in the castle for years. Agnes. And how many bad harvests since then, Sir Roland decides to stop contributing. The irony, of course, is that cats were once celebrated companions. In the earlier Middle Ages, they were even blessed by priests for their work protecting grain stores. Monks kept them in monasteries, quiet, contemplative creatures perfectly suited to the job of keeping both scrolls and souls free from corruption. But then came the 13th century, and with it, the great rebranding of the cat. As superstition tightened its grip, cats became guilty by association, their independence mistaken for arrogance, their nocturnal habits for witchcraft, and their silence for scheming. If you were too clever, too quiet, or too clean, you were probably in league with the devil. Which explains why cats had such a rough PR problem. In our little village, Father Bryn tries to calm the panic. He delivers a patient sermon titled, "On the Dangers of Blaming Household Pets for Divine Wrath." No one listens. They're too busy watching the cat, who has decided to attend the sermon from a sunny windowsill. When Father Bryn declares, "Evil takes many forms," Shadow yawns. The congregation gasps. Agnes. See, it mocks the Lord. Father Bryn. It's cleaning itself. Agnes. With malice. Meanwhile, Els with the herbalist quietly defends the creature. She feeds Shadow scraps and insists the cat brings luck, provided one stays on her good side. She explains that cats are the protectors of hearths, the guardians of sleep, and, according to her grandmother, excellent listeners. Tom rolls his eyes but admits that since Shadow started sleeping near the mill, no rats have dared to visit. Coincidence, he says. Miracle, says Agnes. Marketing, says Ellsworth. Later that week, an unexpected event silences everyone's suspicions. A sudden swarm of mice overruns the grain stores, nibbling through half the village's winter supply. Shadow, utterly unbothered, walks into the chaos like a queen inspecting her domain. By dawn, the mice are gone. Agnes calls it divine irony. Father Bryn calls it a valuable lesson. Tom calls it expensive. But even he, the most practical of men, leaves a bowl of milk by the doorway that evening. Not as thanks exactly, just as diplomacy. In time, the village learns to live with its mysterious guardian. Shadow becomes a local celebrity. No one dares harm her. When she walks by, people nod respectfully or make a quick sign of the cross, just in case. Superstition fades slowly in this world. Fear often turns into tradition, and tradition becomes habit. So when a black cat crosses your path today, and a tiny part of you still hesitates, remember Shadow. and the villagers who feared her, fed her, and never quite figured her out. She wasn't a witch's companion. She was simply a cat who refused to explain herself. And that, perhaps, was the most magical thing of all. It always begins with milk. Not war, not plague, not politics, just milk. Because in the Middle Ages, few things spoiled faster, smelled worse, or inspired more philosophical debate about why God allows dairy to suffer. On an ordinary morning, the village wakes to a scandal. Every jug of milk in town has turned sour overnight. The cows are fine. The air is fine. The universe, however, has clearly chosen violence. And so, as is tradition, everyone starts blaming everyone else. Agnes the gossip arrives first, eyes wide, holding a jug that could knock a monk unconscious. "It's cursed," she declares, with the confidence of a scholar who once read half a psalm. "The whole village?" asks Tom the miller, trying not to breathe. "Especially yours," she says. "I can smell the sin in it." Tom doesn't dignify that with a response. He just sighs and pours the sour milk into a ditch, where it will no doubt create a smaller, angrier ditch. In truth, medieval people didn't entirely understand why food spoiled. They had theories, though many deeply creative theories. Sometimes it was the weather. Sometimes it was bad air. Sometimes, if things were particularly tragic, it was your neighbor's envy seeping through the walls. If your milk curdled, you were likely the victim of a milk curse, a favorite in rural superstition. The logic went like this. If your cow produced nothing but sourness, someone, probably a jealous widow or a woman with suspiciously healthy hair, had stolen your luck, or worse, your cow's virtue. Elswith the herbalist naturally sees opportunity. She sets up her stall with dramatic flair, arranging bundles of herbs like miniature miracles. "For spoiled milk," she says solemnly, "you need dried sage, a pinch of iron filings, and a recitation of Psalm 31, backwards." "Backwards?" asks Agnes, horrified. "Yes, otherwise the curse thinks you're agreeing with it." Within an hour, half the village is mumbling inverted scripture while shaking spoons of herbs into their jugs. It accomplishes absolutely nothing, except to make everything smell like burning salad. Meanwhile, Father Bryn tries once again to reason with them. He explains patiently that curdled milk is a natural occurrence, something about heat, time, and perhaps divine mystery in the form of bacteria, though he doesn't call it that. "It is not witchcraft," he insists. "Then why did my milk sour the day after I said something mean about Sir Roland?" asks Agnes. "Coincidence," Father Bryn sighs. "Ah," she nods wisely. "So it's a coincidence curse." At the castle, Sir Roland himself faces the same issue. His steward complains that even the milk meant for the noble table has gone bad. Sir Roland, too proud to admit confusion, declares it a test of virtue. He drinks it anyway, regrets it immediately, and orders that, from now on, the milk shall be thoroughly blessed before entering noble lips. He then discreetly sends a messenger to Els with for one of those anti-souring charms, purely symbolic. By midday, the entire village smells faintly of despair and cheese. Children run about holding twigs of sage like magic wands. Someone starts chanting to the cows. The cows, unimpressed, continue chewing. Finally, a breeze shifts. The day cools. And the next morning, the new batch of milk is perfectly fine again. Father Bryn preaches about patience. Elswith preaches about herbal loyalty. Agnes preaches to anyone standing still that her prayers fixed it. Tom says nothing. He just sells more flour and makes sure his next loaf rises properly, muttering, "At least bread never curdles." The episode fades, but not the lesson. In this world, nothing happens without meaning. A spoiled jug is never just spoiled. It's an omen, a message, a reminder that life prefers to keep people guessing. And maybe that's what superstition really was, a medieval insurance policy against randomness. Because when everything feels fragile, your crops, your animals, your health, you cling to meaning like it's armor, even if that meaning smells faintly of spoiled milk. By now, the village has accepted a simple truth. If something can be feared, it should also be managed. Not solved, not understood, just politely handled. preferably with salt, bread, and a prayer you half remember. Inside every cottage, protection is everywhere. It hangs from rafters, hides under door frames, rests in pockets, and occasionally falls into stew. If you could bottle peace of mind, this would be it, only dustier. Take Agnes's cottage, for example. She lives alone but shares her space with approximately 47 protective charms. Each one handmade, blessed, or energetically cooperative, depending on who you ask. There's a horseshoe over the door, open side up, to catch the luck. A jar of salt by the window, to confuse demons. A tiny loaf of stale bread hanging on a string, to attract only friendly spirits, preferably ones who like carbs. It looks less like a home and more like a medieval version of a hardware store run by anxiety. The use of salt, of course, is ancient. In the Middle Ages, salt wasn't just valuable, it was powerful. Pure, white, incorruptible, and mildly delicious. People sprinkled it across thresholds, mixed it into water for blessings, or tucked it into corners, where the cold and evil tend to gather. It was even used during baptisms, a taste of purity before the long road of temptation and questionable hygiene. So when Father Bryn visits Agnes and finds her solemnly circling the table, flinging pinches of salt like a disappointed chef, he decides not to interfere. "Just keeping the devil off the furniture, Father," she explains. "Has he been sitting there recently? I don't wait to find out." Meanwhile, Els with the herbalist runs a side business called Charms by Weight. Her most popular item? Tiny linen pouches filled with salt, rosemary, and a single nail. They're meant to be hung near the hearth, a medieval fire alarm for misfortune. Each pouch comes with instructions. Replace monthly. Never open it lest the luck escape. If it falls, apologize to it immediately. No one knows whether it works. But no one doesn't know either, which is good enough. Tom the miller, predictably, refuses to play along. He's practical, skeptical, and believes flour solves most problems. Yet even he admits to keeping one old habit. Every morning, before grinding begins, he drops a crumb of bread into the first sack. "For the mill spirits," he says, shrugging. "It's tradition. Keeps the stones turning smooth." Agnes overhears this once and nearly faints with vindication. "You see, even Tom believes in charms." "It's not a charm," he insists. "It's lubrication. For the soul," she adds solemnly. "Even the castle has its rituals." In the kitchen, maids scatter salt beneath the table legs, to keep envy from eating the meal before we do. In the armory, Sir Roland keeps a small iron spoon in his belt pouch, said to reflect evil glances. He insists it's merely for stirring travel porridge. No one believes him. One night, after too much ale, a visiting noble laughs at the spoon. Sir Roland smiles, raises his cup, and quietly touches the wooden rim 3 times. The noble's chair breaks moments later. Sir Roland does not gloat. He merely adjusts the spoon. All this might sound absurd, but superstition at its heart was a kind of language, a slow, humble way of speaking to the world. Bread said, "Feed me gently." Salt said, "Preserve me body and soul." Iron said, "I am strong enough to keep nightmares out." And so people covered their lives with symbols, each one a whisper of reassurance that the unseen was being managed, politely. Later that week, Father Bryn finds himself alone in the chapel during a thunderstorm. The wind shakes the windows. Lightning flashes across the rafters. And though he knows the science, knows it's merely heat, light, and divine dramatics, he quietly sprinkles a pinch of salt at the door, just in case. When morning comes, the rain stops. The air smells of wet earth, smoke, and faint contentment. Agnes sweeps the ashes from her hearth, humming softly. Elswith restocks her charms. Tom needs his bread and refuses to admit he muttered a blessing. The village breathes, and life, for the moment, feels safely contained. Guarded by bread, salt, iron, and faith wrapped in linen. There is a small bridge on the edge of the village, a modest thing of wood and stone, built to cross a stream that's far too proud for its size. It creaks like an old man clearing his throat and always smells faintly of moss, damp leaves, and the memory of things dropped accidentally. You would think such a harmless place would inspire no particular feeling. And yet, no one in the village likes to cross it after dark. Because sometimes, if you stop halfway and listen very carefully, you'll hear a whisper. Of course, there are logical explanations for this. Tom the miller, ever the skeptic, says it's the sound of water and wind conspiring to spook simple minds. Agnes, however, has a more precise theory. It's the drowned ones, she whispers solemnly. Their voices rise when the moon does. Which drowned ones? Asks Father Bryn, already regretting it. The ones who didn't mean to, she clarifies, as if that helps. In truth, water has always made people nervous. It gives life, yes, but also takes it back, unpredictably. And in the Middle Ages, when rivers flooded, when bridges broke, when someone vanished downstream, people needed reasons. And so the stories came about spirits who guarded crossings, about maidens who sang from under the bridge, about men who traded their shadows for safe passage. It wasn't just folklore. It was public infrastructure psychology. The villagers' current theory involves a bridge whisperer, a ghostly figure who speaks warnings to those who cross alone. Naturally, this has done wonders for social togetherness. No one crosses the bridge without company anymore. Even Father Bryn, whose faith is supposedly unshakable, has started scheduling his errands around the sun. Just to encourage fellowship, he explains. One misty evening, Els with the herbalist decides to test the legend. Armed with nothing but her walking stick and an irritated look, she marches to the bridge. Spirits, she announces. If you're here, at least make yourselves useful and stop the moss from growing on the steps. The stream gurgles in response, which, to be fair, is all it ever does. She waits, listens. Nothing. Satisfied, she turns to leave. And then, softly, there it is. A low sigh, deep and slow, like the breath of the earth itself. She freezes. The sigh comes again. She squints over the railing and finds Tom the miller, half hidden beneath, fixing a loose plank. Tom! What? You're the whisper? What whisper? That one. That's me complaining. Mystery solved. The village, however, refuses to believe it. Of course he'd say that, Agnes insists. That's exactly what a possessed man would say. By the next week, the whisper has evolved into a legend. Now, people claim it's the spirit of a mason who built the bridge and still mutters about unpaid wages. Children toss crumbs over the side to feed him. Couples dare each other to kiss mid-crossing, for luck. And Father Bryn, caught between amusement and despair, blesses the bridge with holy water once a month, just to keep things civil. Historically, this kind of thing was common. Medieval Europe was full of bridge legends, from England's devil's bridge bargains to Germany's river spirits. Crossings were liminal spaces, the boundaries between worlds, where water, land, and fear met politely for negotiations. So, in our little village, people keep their traditions. When they cross, they whisper small greetings into the stream. When they pass beneath, they toss a flower or coin. Not payment exactly, just acknowledgement, because you never really knew who might be listening. One evening, as the moonlight turns the water silver, you find yourself standing on that same bridge. It's quiet, except for the creak of boards, the trickle below, and something faint, something rhythmic. You lean closer. The whisper returns, soft, almost kind. It doesn't sound angry, just old. You nod respectfully, and for a brief moment, the bridge seems to exhale. Then the night goes still again, as if both of you and whatever lingers beneath, have agreed not to tell anyone what really happened. If you ever want to see the full range of medieval emotion, from quiet panic to enthusiastic prayer, just mention the word illness. Not the ordinary kind, like a sore back from carrying firewood, or emotional fatigue from listening to Agnes. No, the kind of illness that arrives uninvited, makes itself comfortable, and refuses to leave politely. One morning, it begins with a rumor. Someone's cousin's neighbor's goat has developed the look. No one can define what the look is, but it's definitely contagious. By noon, half the village is convinced something is spreading. By sunset, Father Bryn is preparing extra candles for Mass, and Els with the herbalist is selling garlic like it's gold dust. Medieval medicine was an elegant blend of faith, herbs, and guesswork. Doctors, if you could find one, used phrases like unbalanced humors and corrupted air. This, incidentally, was true of most things back then, including marriage. If someone coughed, you opened a window. If someone sneezed, you prayed. If someone died, you blamed the wind. Agnes arrives at Tom, the miller's door, with alarming news. "Tom," she says, "the sickness is in the air." "So is everything, Agnes." "No, this is special air. Punishment air." "What does it punish?" "Skeptics." Tom nods solemnly, inhales deeply, and goes back to his flower. By the second day, everyone has a theory. Father Bryn says it's a divine warning to repent. Ellsworth says it's an excess of heat and bile, curable by fasting or maybe a bath, but that's controversial. Sir Roland blames the peasants' hygiene, as nobles traditionally do. Agnes, however, has already decided it's the work of envy. "Someone looked too long at someone's cow," she explains, "and now the air's offended." In truth, plagues were common visitors in the Middle Ages, and while fear spread faster than the sickness itself, people found creative ways to stay brave. Villagers burned herbs to purify the air. They carried posies, amulets, or breadcrumbs blessed by monks. They wore masks stuffed with rosemary or vinegar-soaked rags. And they prayed a lot because nothing says solid pandemic plan like moral negotiation with the divine. One afternoon, Father Bryn leads a procession through the village. Bells ringing, incense swinging, everyone singing half a hymn and half a panicked hum. He blesses each cottage door with holy water, while Ellsworth walks behind, sprinkling her own mix of sage and superstition. When they meet, they exchange polite smiles, like rival salespeople in the same market. "Faith first, herbs second," says Father Bryn. "Or herbs first, faith second," says Ellsworth. "It's not a race." "Then why are you walking faster?" By the end of the week, the illness passes. No one knows exactly why. Some say it was the prayers, others the herbs. Tom insists it's because everyone stopped visiting each other. "Social distance," he mutters. "The only cure for gossip." Agnes gasps. "You mean my sacrifices worked? You made sacrifices?" "Of course. I threw my least favorite spoon into the fire." She beams, victorious. Father Bryn sighs so deeply it could be classified as a sermon. Historically, this is all quite faithful to fact. People truly believed sickness could be carried by air, the miasma theory. They wore charms, burnt incense, and blamed emotions like envy or sin for infection. In many ways, it was their attempt to find meaning in chaos, to make invisible things feel slightly more manageable. When evening falls, the village exhales in relief. The bells are silent again. The air smells of ash, garlic, and the faint sweetness of survival. Father Bryn kneels in the chapel, whispering thanks. Ellsworth counts her earnings and prays for repeat customers, discreetly. Agnes knocks on wood, just in case. And Tom? He sits by the river, looking at the calm reflection of the moon, and quietly admits, only to himself, that he too feels a little safer when the candles are lit, because faith, fear, and comfort often share the same bench in the dark. In the Middle Ages, every home had its own little oracle. Not a priest, not a prophet, but a candle. A candle could tell you everything you needed to know. Whether your day would be lucky, whether someone nearby was gossiping about you, whether you'd survive winter or merely the conversation with Agnes. All you had to do was watch how it burned. One evening, Tom the miller notices something odd. The candle on his table leans slightly to the left, its flame bending as if whispering secrets to the air. "A draft," he mutters. "A message," corrects Agnes, appearing, as usual, at the worst possible time. "Tom, that's no ordinary tilt. That's a warning." "Against what? Pride? Or maybe mice? It varies." Tom sighs, pinches the wick straight, and declares that if the candle wants to talk, you should do so in Latin. Candles, you see, were the medieval mood rings of destiny. A bright, tall flame? Good fortune. A flickering one? Restless spirits nearby. If it sputtered and went out entirely, well, someone in the room had offended heaven. It was theology, weather forecasting, and indoor entertainment all at once. Father Bryn, of course, disapproves. He delivers a measured sermon about how candles are for prayer, not prophecy. The following night, his own candle goes out mid-reading. He stares at it in silence, then quietly lights another one, just in case. Meanwhile, Els with the herbalist has her own system. She reads candles like scholars read books. If the wax drips to the north, someone's speaking your name kindly. If it drips south, gossip. If it forms the shape of a heart, love is near. If it forms anything unidentifiable, she calls it a mystery with potential resale value. Her customers adore it, because when life is uncertain, a candle that flutters hopefully is a comfort, even if it's only reacting to wind or an overexcited chicken outside. Superstitions about candles ran deep. In noble halls, people believed that if a flame burned blue, a ghost was visiting, possibly to check on inheritance paperwork. In peasant homes, 2 candles burning side by side meant good luck for marriage. Unless one guttered suddenly, then it meant a quarrel, or worse, your partner was thinking about someone else. Which, given medieval hygiene standards, is impressive optimism. That night, the village is aglow with flickering omens. Windows shimmer, wax drips. Some flames lean, others shiver. All of them whispering silent nonsense that humans turn into poetry. Agnes sits by her table, watching her candle tremble. "It's dancing," she says softly. "It's melting," says Tom. "No," she insists. "It's laughing." She's not entirely wrong. A candle's flame, when seen through tired eyes, really does look alive. A small, bright being swaying to music only fire hears. The church records even mention candle tests. During trials, some believed a guilty person's flame would flicker, while the innocent burned steady. The flaw, of course, was that the guilty often trembled, and their trembling shook the air, and their shaking air made their candle flicker, thus proving, in perfect circular logic, that justice burns unevenly. One evening, a fierce storm rattles the windows. The villagers gather at the tavern, a dozen candles huddled on tables like nervous saints. Sir Roland is there too, trying to appear brave as thunder shakes the rafters. When a sudden gust snuffs out every flame except his, Agnes gasps. He's chosen. Sir Roland, not eager for any divine responsibilities, leans over and blows his own candle out immediately. The next morning, calm returns. Wax pools are scraped, wicks trimmed, and no one remembers exactly what any of it meant. But for a few quiet hours each night, the villagers found meaning in their flickering little suns, each one a warm negotiation with fate, and perhaps that's what made it so comforting. The candle didn't really predict anything. It just burned imperfectly, beautifully, reminding everyone that even light trembles sometimes. As evening falls again, you sit near the window. Your candle bends slightly to one side. You watch the soft ripple of flame, the golden glow trembling like laughter caught in wax. Maybe it's trying to tell you something. Maybe it's just being a candle. Either way, you smile, because in a world full of superstition and shadow, some lights are worth keeping, crooked or not. If something goes missing in the village, a spoon, a sock, your will to finish chores, there's only one reasonable explanation. The fairies took it. This is not sarcasm. This is policy. Fairies, in the medieval imagination, were not the glittery winged creatures you see on greeting cards. They were more like neighbors who didn't pay rent, borrowed things without asking, and occasionally replaced your baby with one of theirs for fun. Tiny gods of chaos, living somewhere between not quite evil and definitely inconvenient. It begins one morning with Els, with the herbalist standing outside her cottage, furious. Her prized jar of dried thyme has vanished. "Fairies," says Agnes immediately. "You can't just blame fairies every time you lose something. sighs Tom the Miller. Why not? Because sometimes it's mice. And who sends the mice? Nature. Exactly, fairy nature. Tom gives up. You cannot outlogic someone whose argument structure is made entirely of folklore. In medieval times, fairies weren't just for bedtime stories. They explained the unexplainable. Strange noises, sour milk, lost tools, or why your left shoe suddenly vanished mid-walk. They were the medieval equivalent of my Wi-Fi's acting weird. People hung protective herbs by their doors, scattered iron nails near windows, and avoided whistling after dark, because everyone knew that fairies hated competition. Even the castle had its share of fairy anxiety. Sir Roland, rational as ever, pretended to scoff at the idea. And yet, one morning his ornate glove went missing from his bedside. He spent the entire day accusing the servants, only for the glove to reappear that evening, folded neatly atop his helmet, with a single flower tucked inside. No one admitted anything, but Agnes spread the story before sunset. They fancy him, she whispered to the baker. The fair folk have taste. Father Bryn tries, valiantly, to maintain theological order. He reminds the villagers that angels and fairies are not the same thing. The villagers nod, agree wholeheartedly, and then proceed to ask whether angels accept offerings of honey and milk too. Fairies, according to medieval lore, loved sweet things, especially cream, and so, every few nights people would leave small bowls of milk outside the door. It's just tradition, says Ellsworth, setting one down. A gesture of goodwill. To who? Asks Tom. To whoever doesn't knock the tools over again. The next morning, the milk is gone. Whether licked by a cat, spilled by wind, or drunk by fairies. No one knows and no one wants to. It's enough that harmony feels restored. Every superstition, after all, has its job, to turn confusion into courtesy. If a fairy moves your shoe, you don't curse. You say thank you for reminding you to tidy up. If they spill your grain, you smile, refill it, and mutter, "Ah, playful spirits, how bored you must be." It's diplomacy disguised as delusion, and it works surprisingly well. One night, during a storm, Agnes swears she sees lights dancing beyond the fields. Tiny, flickering orbs twirling in the rain. By morning, the village has split into two camps. Those who believe it was the fairies, and those who believe it was just damp lanterns. Father Bryn, exhausted, sighs. If they are fairies, may they at least help repair the roof. Historically, this all checks out. Medieval people genuinely believed in the fair folk, supernatural beings that lived parallel to humanity. They were neither demons nor angels, but moody middle managers of fate. They could bless your house or trip you in the mud. They could grant love or steal bread. Mostly, though, they existed to keep life interesting. By the week's end, Ellsworth finds her missing time jar sitting neatly on her doorstep. She stares at it, smiles slightly, and sets out another bowl of milk. Tom rolls his eyes. Agnes claps. Father Bryn pretends not to notice. And somewhere in the twilight, the wind moves softly through the grass, just enough to sound like laughter. Because maybe, just maybe, the fairies did return what they borrowed. Or maybe it was simply the way superstition turns fear into friendship, teaching humans to say thank you to the mysteries that keep them company. Courage, in theory, is simple. You face danger, you stand tall, you don't flinch. But in practice, it helps to have a small piece of string tied around your wrist, blessed by someone's grandmother, who swears it's been personally inspected by an angel. Because even knights, those armored symbols of fearlessness, are human. And humans, as we've learned, love insurance in any form. At the castle on the hill, Sir Roland begins his morning as always, by polishing his sword, adjusting his pride, and pretending he isn't superstitious. He is, of course, desperately, but only in tasteful, knightly ways. Hidden beneath the layers of silk and chainmail, he wears a small linen pouch, no bigger than a coin, tied with red thread and sealed with wax. Inside, a fragment of parchment, a pinch of salt, and one single feather. He insists it's a token of honor. though Father Bryn privately notes it looks suspiciously like Elswith's handiwork. Agnes, of course, has opinions. A man in metal fears nothing but rust, she declares. Yet he trembles without his lucky sock. She's not wrong. In the Middle Ages, knights were as steeped in superstition as anyone. Maybe more so. Before battle, they might visit a chapel, kiss a relic, or wear a charm stitched secretly into their tunic. Victory, after all, belonged to the righteous, and righteousness often came in a pouch slightly overpriced from someone like Elswith. That morning, Sir Roland prepares to ride out for what the castle generously calls a border inspection, and what everyone else calls an excuse to gallop heroically through puddles. As his squire fastens his armor, he notices something missing. "Where's my charm?" "Your what, my lord?" My prayer pouch." "You mean the one with the feather?" "It's symbolic." "Of what?" "None of your concern." Pause. Then the squire quietly retrieves it from where it fell near the stable door. Sir Roland clears his throat and mutters something about maintaining spiritual balance. Back in the village, Elswith is unsurprised when she hears he still wears it. She made it, after all. A commission he pretended was for a friend. "Knights always say that," she muses. "They want protection but fear looking mortal." "So what's in his charm?" asks Tom, curious. "A feather for lightness," she says. "Salt for strength. And a word written backward, just to confuse the devil." "Does it work?" "Well," she smiles. "He's still alive, isn't he?" Superstition among the noble classes was a delicate dance. Too much faith in charms made you foolish. Too little made you unlucky. So knights found clever ways to hide it. A ribbon sewn under the armor, for love. A gemstone in the hilt of the sword, for style. A prayer muttered under breath, for morale. Courage was always louder when whispered. That afternoon, a light rain begins to fall. The fields shimmer with silver. Sir Roland rides alone, lost in thought, until he spots something unusual. A blackbird perched in his path, staring with unsettling confidence. In medieval logic, this is not good. Birds, especially black ones, often carried messages from fate, and fate rarely sent cheerful postcards. He hesitates. Then, in one smooth motion, he reaches inside his armor, touches the pouch and rides on. The blackbird watches him go, unimpressed. At sunset, he returns unscathed. The village greets him like a hero. Agnes insists it was her prayers that protected him. Father Bryn claims divine intervention. Elswith just raises an eyebrow. "You touched the charm, didn't you?" she says quietly. "Merely for balance," he replies. "Of course," she nods. "It's important to balance faith with feathers." He pretends not to understand the joke. Historically, such talismans were common. Knights carried pieces of scripture, relics of saints, or items charged by ritual. Even kings wore amulets sewn into their sleeves. They called it piety, not superstition, a subtle difference measured mainly in titles. The feather, the salt, the charm, they weren't just tokens of fear. They were reminders that bravery doesn't mean denying worry. It means acknowledging it, then tying it to your belt so it doesn't wander off. That night, in his chamber, Sir Roland removes his armor. The pouch dangles from a cord near his bed. The candlelight flickers against it, soft, warm, unassuming. He smiles faintly, whispers a prayer that sounds half like thanks, half like apology, and blows out the light. Outside, the wind sighs against the castle walls. Somewhere in the village, a blackbird sings once, and the night sleeps, as even brave men must, protected by faith, habit, and one well-traveled feather. You'd think night would be a time for peace, for closing one's eyes, letting the fire die, and forgetting about curses, gossip, and cows that look judgmental. But in the Middle Ages, sleep was anything but simple, because even when your body rested, your soul might not. And that, apparently, was when the most important meetings were scheduled. Dreams were not seen as nonsense. They were letters, delivered nightly, written in strange handwriting. Some from God, some from devils, some According to Agnes, from Bad Stew, in our little village, everyone dreams. They just disagree about what it means. One night, Agnes wakes at dawn, horrified. "I dreamed of a goat," she announces, and asks Tom the miller, "It means betrayal, or indigestion. I knew you'd say that, because you're in the dream." Tom decides that, for the sake of community peace, he'll avoid goats indefinitely. Medieval dream interpretation was an art form, a mix of scripture, astrology, and sheer creative confidence. If you dreamed of bread, it meant prosperity. If you dreamed of teeth falling out, it meant death. If you dreamed of fish, pregnancy. And if you dreamed of flying, it meant pride, which, in medieval terms, was definitely not recommended. It was less psychology, more celestial bureaucracy. Father Bryn, naturally, approaches the subject with cautious theology. He teaches that dreams are not always divine. Sometimes they're merely echoes of digestion. Still, even he admits that, occasionally, a dream feels like more than gas. One morning, he confides in Ellsworth that he dreamed of his old monastery, the one he left decades ago, and found it empty, but for a single candle still burning. Ellsworth nods slowly. "That's a good sign," she says. "Why?" "Because the candle means memory, and the emptiness means peace." "You just made that up, didn't you?" "Entirely," she smiles. "But you feel better now, don't you?" He does. Dream books were common in medieval Europe. They offered page after page of wisdom for the uncertain sleeper. To dream of a wolf means deceit. To dream of water means change. To dream of a monk means confession is due. To dream of your neighbor means keep your window locked. It was entertainment disguised as revelation, fortune-telling with better footnotes. And then there was the moon, the great glowing overseer of all things poetic and suspicious. The villagers treated the moon with a peculiar mix of romance and terror. It controlled tides, moods, and, according to popular belief, most bad decisions. If someone acted strangely, they were not mad. They were moonstruck, literally touched by moonlight in the wrong phase. So when Sir Roland begins pacing the courtyard at midnight, muttering about destiny, Agnes doesn't call him restless. She calls him lunar. "He's caught the moon again," she whispers to Tom. "He's caught boredom," Tom mutters. Ellsworth, meanwhile, keeps a small mirror on her windowsill. On certain nights, she claims the moonlight reflects just so, and in that glow, she can see hints of what's to come. "And what do you see tonight?" asks Father Bryn. "Myself," she says dryly, "which means I should go to sleep earlier." Still, there's something undeniably comforting about the way the moon hangs over the village. A patient spectator, silvering rooftops and puddles, listening to humanity's quiet dreams and louder fears. People believed it shaped their fate, that it tugged on hearts the way it pulled at the sea, that its phases mirrored their fortunes. Full moon, clarity. Half moon, uncertainty. No moon. Best to stay home and not make eye contact with your cat. Even centuries later, you can still feel it. That instinctive hush when the moon is bright. That sense that something is watching, but gently. Because maybe it isn't superstition at all. Maybe the moon, steady and silent, really does keep our secrets. Maybe it always has. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, imagine you're one of them, a villager beneath a sky unspoiled by smoke or light, listening to the distant rhythm of crickets, the soft exhale of your own breath, and that faint silver glow spilling across your floor. You don't fear the night anymore. You trust it, as they once did, because sometimes, even when the world makes no sense, the moon still rises exactly on time. The trouble with being different in a medieval village was that everyone noticed, and the problem with everyone noticing was that everyone also had an opinion, especially Agnes. It began with the chickens. Ellsworth, the herbalist, had always been the quiet sort, too clever by half, too independent for comfort, and entirely too good with plants. People liked her remedies, but they didn't like how she knew exactly what they needed before they'd finished describing their symptoms. That kind of intuition, in an age without explanation, was a little too close to witchcraft. One week, the baker's wife found 3 eggs laid side by side, each with an oddly similar smudge on the shell. She brought them to Agnes naturally. "Signs of enchantment," Agnes declared immediately. "Or just eggs," said Tom the miller. "You'd defend a witch if she baked you bread." "Only if it's fresh," he muttered. Soon enough, the rumor spread. Elswitha's herbs weren't just herbs. Her teas weren't just teas. And her cat, yes, that cat, Shadow, the one from earlier, was definitely her familiar. Father Bryn sighed when he heard. Not because he believed it, but because he knew how belief behaves in groups. It grows legs faster than reason. He tried to calm things. He preached that fear of knowledge was a sin, and that no good Christian should mistake healing for heresy. But fear, once awake, doesn't listen to sermons, prefers whispers, and whispers, as history shows, are far louder. One afternoon, Agnes and 2 others arrived at Elswitha's door. They carried expressions of moral concern and baskets of curiosity. "We just came to check on you," Agnes began sweetly. "I'm fine," said Elswith. "Would you like some tea?" "Not if it's the cursed kind," muttered one of the others. Elswith smiled. "Then perhaps you should bless it first. That usually works." They didn't catch the sarcasm. They rarely did. What followed wasn't a trial, nor a mob, just a long afternoon of gossip disguised as justice. Elswith stood calmly while they searched her shelves. They found herbs, feathers, stones, dried flowers, and a small jar labeled powder for sneezing. Agnes held it up like evidence. "What's this?" "Exactly what it says." "You expect us to believe that?" "Try it." She did. The next 5 minutes confirmed Elswitha's innocence more effectively than any priest ever could. After that day, no one called her a witch again, at least not to her face. But she noticed the way people glanced at her cottage from the road, how they hesitated before knocking, how their coins sometimes trembled when they handed them to her. It didn't make her bitter. It just made her quiet. Father Bryn visited often after that. He said little, usually bringing bread or candles as an excuse. Sometimes they spoke of faith, sometimes of plants, sometimes of nothing at all. One evening, as the sun set through her herbs and bottles, he asked almost shyly, "Do you ever feel angry, Elswith?" "Angry?" She smiled. "No, I just let them fear me a little. It makes them polite." Historically, this kind of story wasn't rare. Most witches of the Middle Ages weren't spellcasters at all. Just midwives, widows, herbalists, or women who owned too many books and too few children. They were punished for the oldest superstition of all. That knowledge held by a woman must surely have come from somewhere unnatural. It wasn't always cruel. Often it was just ignorance, woven with habit and fear. But that, as history tends to prove, is quite enough. As night falls, Elswith lights a candle, its small flame trembling in the draught. She pours herself tea from the same pot that Agnes once accused of sorcery. Outside, the wind hums softly through the grass. Shadow curls at her feet, purring with the serenity of someone who's never cared about public opinion. And for a moment, everything feels balanced again. Faith and fear, rumor and truth, all settling into silence like dust in sunlight. She smiles, whispers almost to the air itself, "If I were a witch, I'd have better shoes." The rain begins before sunset. Not a storm, exactly, more a persistent reminder from the sky that roofs are a privilege. It starts as a hiss on the thatch, then grows into a steady rhythm that wraps the village in sound. Doors close, candles are lit, and one by one, everyone ends up at the tavern. It isn't planned, of course. In villages like this, nothing ever is. People just drift toward warmth the way moths drift toward questionable decisions. By the time the moon rises, the tavern smells of ale, wet wool, and comfort. The fire spits softly, mugs clink, and for once no one is afraid of anything. Tom the miller sits nearest the hearth, hands stretched out toward the flames. His sleeves smell faintly of grain and rain. He insists he's only come in to escape the damp, but he's smiling in that way people do when they've run out of excuses to be alone. Agnes occupies her usual throne, a stool that wobbles with the confidence of someone who believes in destiny. She's already retelling the story of the time she single-handedly outwitted the fairies, which is technically true if you define outwitted as talked at until they left. Elswith, the herbalist, sips from a wooden cup, her herbs bundled neatly by her feet. She listens more than she speaks, her smile soft, her eyes reflecting the firelight. If anyone notices the faint scent of rosemary and rain about her, no one mentions it. Father Bryn arrives last, shaking off his cloak like a tired raven. He blesses no one, scolds no one, just sits, sighs, and lets the sound of laughter do his preaching for him. Even Sir Roland is there, surprisingly, his armor traded for plain clothes, his charm still tied at his wrist. He looks more human this way, which is to say, slightly uncertain and infinitely more likable. For a while, the tavern is filled with nothing but warmth and noise, the kind that feels eternal, even if it only lasts an evening. Then, between sips and sighs, conversation drifts toward the familiar topic, fear. It's Agnes, naturally, who starts it. "Do you ever wonder," she says, "why we're all afraid of everything?" The room goes quiet, except for the fire's crackle. "Because," says Tom slowly, "everything keeps trying to kill us." "Reasonable," nods Father Bryn. "But also boring," adds Elswith. There's laughter, soft, tired, but real. And then Elswith continues, "You know what I think? I think fear is just love in disguise. You don't fear what you don't care about. We fear our homes, our cows, our children, our crops, because we love them." The room nods in that quiet way humans do when someone accidentally says something profound in the middle of a tavern. "So," says Agnes after a pause, "when I feared you were a witch, you loved me," finishes Elswith with a smirk. "In a nervous way," says Agnes. Father Bryn chuckles. He leans back, eyes half closed, listening to the rain tap the windows. "Perhaps," he says softly, "God created fear not as punishment but as memory, a way to remind us what matters." Tom grunts. "Then I must love my roof very deeply." Laughter again, louder this time. The night continues gently. Someone starts humming an old tune, a song about harvests and heartbreak, half prayer, half lullaby. Sir Roland joins in quietly. His voice surprises everyone. Soft, uncertain, but warm. Agnes wipes her eyes and claims it's the smoke. Father Bryn pretends not to notice he's humming too. Outside, the rain slows. The world exhales. For once, no one talks about curses or charms. No one knocks on wood or sprinkles salt. No one worries about fairies, plagues, or omens. They simply exist, together in that fragile golden pocket of time, between the thunder's retreat and dawn's arrival. Historically, this moment is true in its own quiet way, because while medieval life was full of fear, of sickness, of sin, of storms and spirits, it was also full of love disguised as survival. Every superstition, every charm, every whispered prayer wasn't born of ignorance. It was born of care. They feared because they wanted to keep what little light they had. And somehow, across centuries, that instinct hasn't changed at all. When the fire burns low, Father Bryn rises to leave. He looks around the room, at Tom, Agnes, Elswith, Sir Roland, and smiles the weary, holy smile of a man who's finally realized. His sermons were never needed here. "Good night," he says. "Bless you," replies Agnes. "And you," he answers softly, "though I suspect you've blessed yourselves enough tonight." The door opens. The rain has stopped. The moonlight spills across the floor like a benediction. Inside, laughter fades into murmurs. Cups clink one last time, and the tavern settles into silence, the kind of silence that feels full, not empty. Outside, the road glistens with rain, and in the distance, the faint sound of an owl. The village's last reminder that night is still watching, but kindly. Morning comes quietly. No fanfare, no trumpets, Just light, gentle and gold, creeping between shutters like a polite guest who doesn't wish to wake anyone too soon. The rain has left everything clean. The road glistens. The air smells of wood smoke and wet earth. And the village, for the first time in days, is still. Inside her cottage, Elswith sits at the table, grinding herbs in a small stone bowl. Her hands move slowly, rhythmically, as if the work itself is a kind of prayer. Shadow, her cat, sleeps nearby, tail flicking to dreams only cats are invited to. Outside, Tom the miller checks his wheel, finding it spinning smooth and strong. He mutters to himself, not quite a prayer, not quite a joke, and gives the wooden beam a small, almost affectionate tap. Father Bryn, walking by, pretends not to see. Faith and superstition, he's decided, aren't enemies. They're just cousins who argue a lot and secretly share the same house. At the edge of the road, Agnes hangs her laundry, each sheet snapping proudly in the breeze. She hums a hymn, pauses, then spits over her shoulder for good luck. Insurance, she calls it. Faith with flavor, she says. Sir Roland rides past, dressed simply, no armor, no pomp, just a small charm tied to his wrist. Faded now, but still there. He nods at her, smiling. She nods back as if to say, yes, even you need a little help sometimes. The world hasn't changed. Not really. There are still charms on doorways, still salt in corners, still whispers of fairies at the edge of the woods. And maybe that's a good thing, because somewhere between fear and faith, people found something worth keeping, the belief that the unseen still listens. You see, superstition isn't foolishness. It's poetry in disguise, a language made of gestures and habits, spoken by those who had too few words for wonder. When they knocked on wood, they weren't just guarding themselves from fate, they were acknowledging it. When they left milk for the fairies, they were leaving a thank you note to mystery. And when they feared the dark, they didn't curse it. They lit candles, sang softly, and made peace with what they couldn't understand. Centuries have passed. The plagues are gone. The castles crumble. And yet, look around. You still knock on wood. You still make wishes on stars. You still whisper, just in case. Perhaps the only thing that's changed is that we no longer admit we're superstitious. We just call it intuition, or habit, or luck. But it's the same quiet hope, carried forward from those who feared the dark, and learned to live with it. As the sun rises higher, the village begins to stir. Voices drift through open windows. Laughter, chatter, the scrape of spoons in bowls. Life goes on as it always has, half in reason, half in ritual. And you, the listener, find yourself part of it too. One more soul sitting by the hearth of history, watching the small, ordinary magic of human beings trying to make sense of the world. So tonight, when you turn off the lights, when the room grows quiet, and the hum of the modern world softens, remember them, the miller, the gossip, the priest, the herbalist, the knight. Remember how they feared, and how they loved, and how often those two things were the same. And if, before you sleep, you happen to knock softly on your bedside table, don't laugh. They would understand. It's not superstition. It's tradition. It's the old rhythm of comfort, echoing through centuries, still whispering, you are safe now.